is mock draft season, and we are continuing the league-wide Locked On Network mock draft. Today on the clock, we got the Atlanta Falcons, we got the Seattle Seahawks, and we have the New York Jets host representing each team, your team, today. Let's go. Welcome to Locked On NFL Draft.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft. I'm your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And today's show is sponsored by the good folks over at Rock Auto. Rock Auto has amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. We want to thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen of the day. All right, really excited to bring on the first host. Right now, we got the Atlanta Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, join us to pick for the Atlanta Falcons, number 8 overall. First, Aaron, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Love to be talking with you, Eric. Looking forward to chatting with Ryan a little bit later.
Definitely. So this is a very intriguing offseason for the Atlanta Falcons. It started off with kind of losing Calvin Ridley, and I don't think anybody foresaw that after he sat out most of last season. So I think there were already questions in the air about, the availability of him. And then the NFL said, nope, he can't play all the next year. And then Falcons went and traded the best thing that has happened to them over, I don't know, however many years, maybe since drafting Deion Sanders. But you traded your guy Matt Ryan away, and it left a huge void at quarterback. What is the feeling amongst Atlanta Falcons fans right now?
Well, it's kind of split, where you have a lot of people that are optimistic about the future of this team because they're basically doing a rebuild, a full rebuild. They were kind of on the fence. Terry Fontenot said at the combine earlier this offseason that he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, in terms of rebuilding and restocking this roster, but also being competitive. And it seems like the Falcons are not necessarily going to have their cake. So I think there's a lot of people excited about that, but it is with a little bit of trepidation because you're losing the two most stabilizing forces for this team for the last decade. You saw that with Julio Jones last offseason when they traded him. Now you're doing that with Matt Ryan, who's been that stable force and basically, as you say, Croc, like the only good things that have really happened to this Falcons organization as a franchise have happened in the 14 years that Matt Ryan was the quarterback for the football team for the most part. And so there is a little bit of trepidation, I think, for folks like myself moving forward over whether or not, is this going to be a situation where the Falcons revert back to what they were prior to Matt Ryan, which was a team that was very inconsistent, would have a good year and then, bottom out for 3 years or whatever the case may be? Or is this, something that this new regime can sort of sustain and get this team back to competing at the highest levels?
It seems like from the outside looking in, when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, they just have a lot of holes everywhere. So kind of what is the plan to kind of start, at least patching up some of these holes, fixing them? Is it as simple as saying, oh, well, they have to go offensive line? And obviously we'll get to the pick in a few minutes, but is it as simple as going, oh, you got to go offensive line? They had a really bad defense. Can they fix that? Maybe with some edge rushers. They don't have a running back. I know they're probably not looking to do that in the first round, but feels like there's just a lot of holes and a lot of different ways that they can really take this whole thing.
Yeah, the Falcons' philosophy has been stated several times. It's the best player available philosophy. That's what led them to take Kyle Pitts last year at the top of that draft class. And I think that's going to be what they follow suit. As you say, they have a lot of holes everywhere. There's really not a position that isn't a need that could be upgraded for this roster moving forward. So I think they can afford to take the best player available. They obviously need to address the quarterback position at some point, whether that's this year or wait till next year and hope that Marcus Mariota can sort of keep that thing treading water. They need to replace some of the playmakers. You mentioned Calvin really already talked about Julio Jones. You need to get playmakers there, and you need to upgrade this pass rush. That's been really a problem area for the team. So if you're looking at probably the three biggest needs at some premium positions that you normally would use top 10 picks on, quarterback, wide receiver, and edge rusher, make a ton of sense. But I also sort of think the Falcons can't afford to overlook some other positions like safety, like the offensive line, et cetera, going into this draft. I think, this team needs a lot of help, and they really need to establish a foundation for, what hopefully will be future success. And for me personally, when I look at this team, they have really struggled over the last decade when it comes to being in the trenches. Even when this team was performing at a high level, teams could just, out physical them and push them around the trenches. Croc, going all the way back to that 2012 NFC Championship game, the 49ers dominated that team in the trenches, even though we saw Julio Jones and what their skill position players could just outclass a lot of what the 49ers were doing. But my hope is that with this draft, the Falcons can really help, address some of those problems in the trenches, and hopefully can do that with this 8th overall selection.
All right, so you just brought up 8th overall selection, and you're on the clock. Real quick, do want to go through who has been drafted so far and are no longer on the clock. The Jacksonville Jaguars at pick 1 took Aiden Hutchinson. Detroit Lions at pick 2 took Kyle Hamilton. Houston Texans, they drafted Sauce Gardner out of Cincinnati. New York Jets took Thibodeau. The Giants took Evan Neal. Panthers, Malik Willis, and Giants, Trayvon Walker. So, Atlanta Falcons, you are on the clock with pick 8. Who is it going to be?
I feel blessed because Ike Ekwonu has been a player that I've had my eye on since September, when the Falcons' offensive line struggles really came to the fore last season. And I'm like, he's a perfect fit. They have the former NC State coach that brought in that outside zone scheme. He's physical. He's nasty. Arthur Smith wants to be this physical football team. There's no Derrick Henry currently on the Falcons roster. Maybe they can get somebody like a Brian Robinson later in the draft that can be sort of their version of that. But they want to be able to out physical teams, and there's no more physical a player in this draft class than perhaps Ike Ekwonu. So he makes all the sense in the world. I know probably the Falcon fans listening and watching are not happy with the Falcons taking an offensive lineman. Again, it seems like every year they're drafting an offensive lineman, but you got to keep, trying to fix the problem. And I feel like Ike Ekwonu, being arguably the best offensive lineman in this draft class and arguably one of the 2 or 3 best players in this draft class, absolutely fits the bill as the best player available. So I'm sprinting to the podium to take Ike Ekwonu.
I like it, because again, from an outside looking in, watching the Atlanta Falcons on TV, I felt bad for Matt Ryan. Felt like he was running for his life every time. And I think he made the most out of that situation, a situation that was not as ideal for a quarterback. But whoever is going to be the long-term guy, and it may not be Marcus Mariota, maybe they draft a guy and see if they could develop someone later. But let's say this year with Mariota, you got to figure out a way to keep him a little bit more comfortable than what I saw from Matt Ryan. And again, Mariota is not Matt Ryan in the sense of the cerebral aspect of his game. So addressing the offensive line, getting your quarterback some protection, I think that definitely could help.
Absolutely.
All right, so real quick, I do want to ask, do you foresee them potentially going in a different position? I do know they have Kyle Pitts at tight end. You talked about edge. If not Ekwonu, who do you think might be kind of a plan B in that range?
I see a lot of mock drafts have them taking the wide receiver. I get that because it's an obvious need for the Falcons. But again, because of their best player available, I feel like they'll probably pass on that position. So I really feel like they're going to go for the best defensive player. That's probably going to be an edge rusher. Maybe it's Kyle Hamilton if he's there. I also think Malik Willis is certainly a dark horse for the Falcons to take that quarterback position. They look to try to energize this fan base by going after Deshaun Watson earlier this offseason, a local quarterback with a big arm and athleticism. And Malik Willis is a local quarterback with a big arm and athleticism. So if they want to get another bite at that apple, he does make a lot of sense for them at 8.
Awesome. Well, man, Aaron, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you coming on, especially on short notice, picking Ike Ekwonu out of North Carolina State, offensive tackle for the Atlanta Falcons. Aaron, you have a good night. All right, when we come back, we will have another special guest coming on, picking for the Seattle Seahawks. It will be Rob Rang. Who will they take? A lot of guys flying off the board, a lot of good talent. But first, definitely want to talk to you a little bit about betonline.net and how it's your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, podcasts, and reviews for the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head over to the website today and use the mobile device to learn more about the trends and action going on right now. And not just the trends and action with, the basketball that's going on right now or the Master Championship, but you got the NFL draft. And we're here to kind of, maybe we'll throw some props in there to help you with where should you put your money, where are guys going. Make sure you guys head over right now, Bet Online, where the games start. We want to thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen every day. And make sure you're following Locked On NFL as well. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Got a special guest. He usually joins us on Thursday episodes, but we have Rob Rang joining us today to pick for the Seattle Seahawks. You were backstage and you got to listen and see Ekwonu go off of the board. What were some of your thoughts when you saw that? Was that good for you and maybe the guy that you want is still available?
No, it was disappointing because Ekwonu is a heck of a football player. And I think that he absolutely would be in the mix for Seattle's selection at number 9 overall. Since John Schneider, general manager, Pete Carroll as head coach, joined forces in Seattle way back in 2010, Eric, then of the 12 years, Seattle has only had 8 draft picks in the first round. And of that, roughly half of them have been offensive tackles. And so I think that Ekwonu absolutely would be in the mix for the Seahawks. The fact that Ekwonu is off the board, as well as Evan Neal, the off tackle from Alabama, I think that kind of moves the meter a little bit more to the second most popular position that the Seahawks have focused in on, and that being edge rusher. I think that Seattle is going to be a big fan of Jermaine Johnson from Florida State. In my opinion, I thought he was the best player on the field in Mobile. And, considering that pass rush has been a huge area of concern for the Seahawks, obviously there's going to be a lot of people out there talking about that they need a quarterback to replace Russell Wilson. There's going to be some out there who are suggesting that Seattle should go to a cornerback, considering how poor that their secondary play was a year ago. But Seattle has brought in 3 different corners through free agency. The quarterback position, I don't know if this is the draft class that they want to gamble on, although with Kenny Pickett still on the board, I think that would be a strong consideration. But for my money and what I think that the Seattle might be focusing on this draft, I think that they're looking to rebuild that defense. Again, I think that Jermaine Johnson from Florida State just is money in the bank at this point. I think that would be Seattle's selection if they were in fact going to stay here at number 9 overall.
As interesting said, if they are going to stay there, obviously the Seattle Seahawks, the way they got there was trading a lot for Russell Wilson. So how do you feel that void? Obviously, Drew Lock is slated to be the starting quarterback right now. Do you foresee a trade happening? I know Baker Mayfield is out there. Jimmy Garoppolo is out there. And I know a lot of people are like, Jimmy Garoppolo, 49ers, there's no way they trade Jimmy G to the Seattle Seahawks. But just last week, we did see it was the New England Patriots and Miami Dolphins. They made a trade, and they're both obviously in the AFC East. So I know my antennas kind of perked up when I saw that. But what are some of the plans at the quarterback position?
Well, I do think that if a player like a Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo was released by their teams, and then Seattle would certainly show a great deal of interest, maybe even for a very late round selection. As you mentioned, Eric, I mean, it is rare to see, especially quarterbacks, get traded within the same division, especially considering the rivalry, the background between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. But at the same time, I think that any type of veteran quarterback who might be able to play the kind of ball control offense that Pete Carroll has always prioritized, and that certainly is going to be in play. And that's why I think that Kenny Pickett would be in play here at number 9 overall. I mean, we've talked about this before. The Pickett is the most pro ready of the quarterbacks in this draft class. I mean, he was very well coached by Mark Whipple this past season at the University of Pittsburgh as the offensive coordinator. A very, very good one. And so I do think that when you look at Pickett, if you're looking for a quarterback who might be able to play that role of Russell Wilson, be able to come in as a rookie and actually compete with a veteran who was brought in this case, Drew Lock. Russell Wilson, of course, was brought in to compete back in the day with Matt Flynn, stole the job from him, and the rest is history. Seattle may be looking to try to duplicate that history in the past, and Kenny Pickett could be that guy. At the same time, the hand size issues, the fact that Seattle, it does rain. Newsflash, it does rain in Seattle. That might be a little bit more of a concern. And that's why I wonder if Seattle, with 2 first-round picks already in next year's draft class, what looks like it's going to be a much better draft class when it comes to the quarterback position. If they might be looking at next year's class as the one that you get the quarterback, instead in this year's class, get either the offensive tackle, should he fall into your lap, which he almost did. And again, Quana going off the board, number 8 overall, just one selection before, or another pass rusher. If you can build up that defense and then get yourself just reasonably quality quarterback play, I think the way that Pete Carroll looks at things, that's still a win-win and a team that can compete in the NFC West.
I'm going to put you on the clock, and you are going to make your official pick. I know it felt like you were leaning towards a certain player, but we need to make it official. At pick 9 overall, who are the Seattle Seahawks taking?
With a number 9 overall selection, the 2022 NFL Draft, the Seattle Seahawks select Jermaine Johnson II, edge rusher, Florida State University. So he originally played his college ball at the University of Georgia, actually as a junior college prospect, if we want to go all the way back. And then, just like a lot of guys, realized how incredibly gifted that the Georgia Bulldogs were, transferred to Florida State. And in his one season in Tallahassee, all he did was win the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Led him in tackles for loss with 18, led him in sacks with 12, played primarily as a traditional 4-3 defensive end, the 3, at a 3-point stance with his hand in the dirt coming off the edge as a defensive end. Seattle is going to be expected, at least, to be playing a little bit more of a 3-4 and asking Johnson to be able to play that stand-up linebacker role. And that's what's so interesting about the way that Johnson performed in the Senior Bowl, Eric, is that he was asked to play at that 2-point stance. He did show those same really long, strong arms to be able to kind of get off of blocks and be able to set the edge in terms of the running game, and just the way that he mirrors his hands and his feet really couples them very, very nicely. He does have the long arms and the physical hands to be able to kind of break through tackles. I think that he is one of the most pro-ready edge rushers in this year's draft class and very worthy of number 9 overall consideration. I think that you pair him with Seattle's best young edge rusher already, Darrell Taylor, who is quicker, not necessarily more powerful than Johnson. I think that Seattle has the tandem as far as edge rushers that they've been looking to develop in their roster rebuild.
All right, and kind of an underrated addition to that defensive line, Shelby Harris. I'm curious to see what he does for Seattle. I do think he'll step in, be a starter. Sounds like a plan for success for the Seattle Seahawks, who take Jermaine Johnson, number 9 overall. Rob Rang is going to stay with us, and when we come back, we are going to make the selection for the New York Jets, a team that at pick 4 overall, they took Kayvon Thibodeau. What do they do at pick 10? We're going to talk through that. But first, definitely want to talk to you a little bit about Rock Auto. All right. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it is now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why endure often pointless and seamless, intimidating questioning about your vehicle while a person behind the counter, they look in their computer and they only choose from whatever options they have at their warehouse? Well, you don't need to do that, because you have a computer, you have a phone, and you can go to rockauto.com from either one of those. Save time and money by using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more on the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. And Rock Auto prices, they are reliably low for every single customer. So no matter your financial needs, they will have something for you to be able to address your car needs. Go explore the easy website today and find a solution for your auto parts. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We are now on the clock for the New York Jets. It took Kayvon Thibodeau. This is a team that, I mean, they're obviously kind of rebuilding right now around a very young quarterback, Zach Wilson, a guy who really kind of running for his life a lot and felt a little sped up. And I like to call that your time clock, where maybe you throw passes before you truly want to get rid of the ball. And when that happens, you have ugly games, you have ugly moments. I remember, I believe it was week 2, looking down at my phone. I was at the 49ers Philadelphia Eagle game, and I said, what? That can't be right. It's the third quarter, and Zach Wilson has 4 completions and 4 interceptions. But a lot of that can come from, like, how comfortable are you out there? And I think one of the best things to help them is the offensive line. They did draft Becton. They did draft a guard from USC last year, Vera Tucker, in the first round. So they have been working towards addressing it. But between the O-line, between maybe the pass catchers being a little inconsistent, I do like Elijah Moore. I think he's someone to truly build around. There's a lot of help that's needed for Zach Wilson. Where do you think they should start?
Well, I think that you make some excellent points there. I mean, the fact that you'd love to be able to protect the investment that you made in the young quarterback. And you mentioned Mekhi Becton. I think that there's a lot of Jets fans, a lot of people nationally, Eric, they're just are ignoring the fact that Mekhi Becton missed as many games as he did this past season. That was part of the reason why that Zach Wilson didn't feel as comfortable as he did. And yet the Jets presumably are going to get Mekhi Becton back this upcoming season. And when he is right, we're talking about one of the more physically gifted young left tackles in all of the NFL. And especially when you complement him, as you mentioned, with Vera Tucker, the first round selection this past year. So while I'm intrigued by the possibility, I like it in theory that the Jets are going to be, building up their offensive line. Charles Cross is a career left tackle for Mississippi State. He's my highest rated offensive lineman still on the board. Trevor Penning, same thing. Out of Northern Iowa, he may have right tackle size, but he's kind of cut his teeth the left tackle position. I'm not so sure that you want to take a project to right tackle number 10 overall. I think you could make an argument for the wide receivers, but again, we talked about before with Mekhi Becton at the offensive tackle position. I just want to see what Corey Davis can bring to the New York Jets when he's fully healthy. He has an opportunity to work with Zach Wilson. I guess have a little bit more patience at that position than some do. I also like Elijah Moore. I like Braxton Berrios, just the little slot receiver that he is as well.
And they just gave him some money too. So clearly they plan on him being around to some extent. But they also went out and said, you know what, we're going to give up picks 35 and 38 for Tyreek Hill. Obviously, it didn't work out, but they did attempt. So do you think that they could potentially be leaning towards a receiver?
I think that you have to at least consider that. I think that Garrett Wilson from Ohio State, Drake London from USC, to me, are the two that really make a lot of sense. They're obviously very, very different players. Garrett Wilson, with his ability to just go up and get the football, make people miss after the catch. He's just dynamic in space. And then you got Drake London, we talked about before, has a little bit of Mike Evans to him. So a much more big physical receiver. He's going to wind up, running and doing all of his workouts here. April 15th, I believe, is the rescheduled pro day. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how well represented that the New York Jets are at that USC campus. And I'll mention one other player, just because I think when you're talking about a head coach like Robert Saleh, I realize that they made a big move in the addition of DJ Reed, cornerback that Saleh previously coached with the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, I know him from his days here with the Seattle Seahawks, a really good football player. But at the same time, you look at the Jets cornerback depth chart moving forward. You get past the 2022 season into the 2023. then besides DJ Reed, you have a lot of names, guys who are drafted, but not necessarily proven players. I am a huge fan of Derek Stingley, have been for a long time. I just don't, as long as the Jets feel comfortable that Stingley can handle just the different environment that is New York City, then I think that Stingley is absolutely a top 10 caliber player. And I have a hard time believing that Robert Saleh wouldn't push for him, just considering his talent in those defensive routes. So again, that I don't know as far as if the Jets believe in Derek Stingley, the man, but the player is worthy of top 10 selection at this point.
All right, so I am going to put you on the spot here with the 10th overall pick, picking for the New York Jets. I'll tell you some guys who are available, and you kind of mentioned these players being somewhat of a need for the New York Jets and see if they'll address it. And also, you talked about DJ Reed. Also, on the other side, you got Bryce Hall, who has played well. I think he's trending in the right direction, but is he trending enough in the right direction to hold off them drafting a guy like Derek Stingley Jr.? But Charles Cross, Garrett Wilson, receiver, Derek Stingley Jr., Drake London, Jameson Williams, or maybe even Trevor Penning. Do any of those names sound enticing to you enough to take them at pick 10? And who will pick 10 be?
Again, for me, I always kind of come back to just the tape. What's the simplest way of answering this question? And I think that easily the best player of those guys that we just listed is Derek Stingley. And considering the cornerback is a position of concern, considering Robert Saleh's defensive roots, considering the fact that at least in this projection, you have Kayvon Thibodeau going, earlier in this draft at number 4 overall. I just think that the combination of those two, to me, it's really, really exciting. Whereas if you go with an edge rusher, but don't necessarily address your back end in the secondary, or you take a wide receiver, but don't necessarily have better pass protection, I just don't know that it gets it done. But if you kind of go for broke with the selection that the New York Jets received, of course, because they traded away Jamal Adams to the Seattle Seahawks, I think you have to get a top 10 kind of caliber player, an impact player. I think that there's 2 of this class that we just mentioned that really offer that. I'm a big fan of the receivers in Garrett Wilson and Drake London. I just think that Wilson, his fit in New York's offense makes a little bit more sense than Drake London, as much as I love his game. But to me, you want a playmaker, you want a guy who's worthy of top 10 consideration. For me, the selection is easy. I'm going Derek Stingley, the corner from LSU.
All right, Derek Stingley. And I don't know if that means that, DJ Reed, he is a guy that plays multiple positions. So they signed him. He can play outside. He can play nickel. Hell, he can play some safety. He did a lot of those things for the 49ers. I know he did some things on the outside specifically for the Seattle Seahawks. We'll see what the plans are for him with the New York Jets, with an organization that they're familiar with him. Robert Saleh coached him with San Francisco. They drafted him. So they'll have big plans for him. We'll see exactly how they utilize him. To do a recap, Equinu going to the Falcons, offensive tackle out of North Carolina State. Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher, he lands with the Seattle Seahawks. And Derek Stingley Jr., 10th overall pick, headed to the New York Jets. Rob, I definitely want to thank you for joining me on this podcast. If you aren't already, follow Rob Rang on Twitter at Rob Rang. Also, you can follow me at Eric_Crocker on Twitter as well. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. But that's going to do it. When we come back, got another 3 teams on the clock. We'll get to that tomorrow. We are out. Peace.